They're letting you go, Charlotte. Effective immediately. That's what my younger brother said to me, without flinching, without remorse, and in front of the entire boardroom, after I'd dedicated 22 years of my life to our family business. He didn't even call me by my nickname. Just Charlotte, like I was some distant employee he barely knew. My name is Charlotte Hayes. I'm 47 years old, and up until last Thursday, I was the Director of Operations at Hayes Harvest Co., a multi-state agricultural supply company my grandfather started with 2 tractors and a handshake deal back in the 1950s. What began as a simple corn and wheat farm turned into a thriving logistics and distribution enterprise. My father, Howard Hayes, expanded it. My mother handled the books. And I ran the entire operation with a team of 20 and a binder thicker than a Bible. But when Dad got sick 2 years ago, everything shifted. Zach, my baby brother, fresh off his MBA from Boston and full of buzzwords like streamline and vertical integration, came home. At first, I welcomed him. I thought it would be nice to have help. We used to ride the combine together when he was a kid. He couldn't reach the pedals, so he'd sit on my lap and pretend to steer. I should have known the boy who once cried, because his overalls were itchy, would grow up to become a man who thought spreadsheets were more valuable than people. It started slow. I stopped being invited to meetings. My budgets were reviewed by people I'd never hired. Vendors I'd worked with for a decade were suddenly replaced with newer, flashier ones that charged more for less. When I raised concerns, I was told to focus on team morale and leave the big picture to leadership. Leadership. That was the word Zach kept using after he was named interim CEO when Dad retired early for health reasons. It wasn't even a vote. It was decided in the best interest of the company, and of course, no one challenged it. Who would? Our cousin Logan had just been hired as a consultant, and half the board were friends of Zach's from college or golf. Still, I stayed. I smiled. I kept the trucks running, the schedules tight, and the clients happy. I swallowed the insult when they moved my office from the front wing to a repurposed storage room near the loading docks. I bit my tongue when Zach called my spreadsheets outdated in front of the interns. I told myself it was just a phase. That family would come through. That loyalty still meant something. Then, last Thursday morning, Zach walked into the boardroom where I was reviewing distribution charts and said the words I'll never forget. "We appreciate everything you've done, Charlotte. But the company's moving in a new direction. Effective immediately, we're terminating your position." I laughed. I actually laughed. I thought it was a joke. But then I saw Logan leaning against the wall, arms crossed, and the HR rep, who I'd hired 2 years ago, refusing to meet my eyes. I looked at Zach. "You're firing me? From my own family's company?" "It's not personal," he said. "It's strategic." My hands were shaking. Not from sadness, not even from shock, but from the sheer, suffocating weight of betrayal. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I stood up, gathered my binder, and walked out. Nobody followed me. Back at my car, I sat in the driver's seat, staring at the front of the building. The logo on the glass door still had my father's initials, HHC. The loading docks buzzed with forklifts I'd helped budget for. Every acre of land behind that office had been walked, surveyed, planted, and harvested under my watch. And just like that, they tossed me out like spoiled produce. But what Zach didn't realize, what none of them realized, was that I'd kept everything. Every invoice, every contract, every vendor change, every suspicious budget line. Because when you're a woman in a man's world, especially a family business, you learn to document everything. I looked at the black binder in my passenger seat. My hands were no longer shaking. "Let's see how they handle Friday without me," I said out loud. And then I drove home. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was sad. No, sadness had already passed through me like a storm. What remained was a quiet, heavy stillness, like the moment after a tree falls in the forest and the air hasn't yet decided what to do next. I sat at the dining room table with a cup of coffee going cold, staring at the black binder I'd brought home from the office. My husband, Aaron, came downstairs around 5 a.m., still half asleep. He rubbed his eyes and said, "You're up early." I didn't answer. I couldn't. He looked at the binder, then at me. "Is it done?" he asked. "They fired me," I said flatly. "Zach did it himself. Logan was there too." Aaron's jaw clenched. "Are you serious? After everything you've done for that place?" I nodded. He sat down across from me and took my hand. "So what now?" I opened the binder and started flipping pages. "Now? I'm going to find out why they really pushed me out. Because here's the truth. Hayes Harvest Co. didn't just wake up one morning and decide to eliminate its director of operations. They didn't replace me with a younger, shinier candidate who had better ideas or more experience. They replaced me with my cousin Logan, a man with no agricultural background, no supply chain experience, and no qualifications other than being Zach's beer pong partner from college. I'd seen the warning signs. Vendor changes that didn't make sense. Supply costs spiking when commodity prices were stable. Contracts being routed through Logan's email instead of finance. And yet, I kept telling myself it was just growing pains. That maybe I was being paranoid. But paranoia is just pattern recognition in disguise. I dug into the vendor records I'd copied before leaving. I had full access to the old vendor portal, because I was the one who set it up. Every contract, every invoice, every wire transfer was still there. And that's when I found them. Midwest Grow Ops LLC. The name meant nothing to me. They weren't one of our legacy suppliers. I cross-referenced them with our fertilizer and equipment orders. 3 transactions stood out immediately. Same shipment quantities we'd ordered the year before, but this time, the prices were inflated by nearly 40%. The paperwork looked clean. Scanned contracts, signed digital authorizations, purchase orders. But the billing address? A P.O. box in Springfield. I pulled up their business registration. The company was formed 14 months ago. Registered agent, Logan Dwyer. I stared at the screen for a long time, feeling the knot in my stomach tighten. It was all starting to make sense. Logan wasn't just a bad hire. He was the front man, the middleman. And Zach? He was either too blind to see it, or worse. He was part of it. I called a friend of mine from the local co-op, a guy named Marty who's been in ag supply for over 30 years. I asked if he'd ever heard of Midwest Grow Ops. His answer? Only once. Quoted me double what my usual guy charged. Total scam. I didn't say much after that. I just thanked him and hung up. The betrayal wasn't just personal anymore. It was professional. It was strategic. They hadn't just removed me from the company. They'd removed the last person who knew how the books were supposed to look. They thought I'd leave quietly, that I'd retreat to my garden, knit sweaters, and fade into the background while they siphoned money out of the company my grandfather built. But I'm not going anywhere. And I don't fade. I spent the next 3 hours scanning every invoice, downloading every vendor contract, every supply chain authorization that had passed through Logan's hands. And then I found something that made me stop cold. One of the shipments marked as received and paid in full had never actually arrived. I knew this because it was scheduled for delivery to a warehouse we no longer owned. We'd sold that warehouse 6 months ago. The delivery record was fake. The entire transaction was fiction. They weren't just inflating prices. They were billing for phantom deliveries. And the signatures on the approval forms? They weren't mine, but someone had tried really hard to make them look like mine. That was the moment everything changed. I wasn't just fired. I was being set up. I sat in my home office, heart pounding, staring at the fake signature on a shipment invoice for $64,280. It was supposed to be a delivery of equipment to a warehouse in Springfield. Problem was, we sold that warehouse 6 months ago. The address didn't even belong to us anymore. And the signature? It was meant to be mine. But I knew my own handwriting, and that sloppy, looped C wasn't mine. It was a forgery. My stomach twisted, not just because of what they were doing, but because of what it meant. This wasn't just a plan to push me out. It was a cover-up, A setup. They needed me gone because they were using my name to launder fake purchases through fake vendors. And they thought no one would look twice because, in their minds, I was already history. I dug deeper. Every invoice from Midwest Grow-Ops was routed through Logan's newly created internal email alias, an account no one else had access to, set up with temporary admin credentials that should have expired weeks ago. And the approval chain? All digital signatures. All conveniently signed by me, with timestamps that didn't match my access logs. Because I wasn't even in the building those days. I felt a wave of anger roll through me. This wasn't just theft. This was identity fraud, corporate fraud. And worst of all, it was being executed by people who shared my last name. At noon, I got a text from Madison, my former assistant. She'd stayed quiet since I left, probably scared. But the message was short and telling. They're deleting your folders from the shared drive. All of them, I called her. Did they say anything? Number Zach just told it to wipe your entire directory, even the archived backups. That was all I needed to hear. They were erasing evidence. I thanked her and hung up. Luckily, I'd already backed up everything onto a secure drive months ago. Not because I saw this coming, but because I never trusted Logan with access to critical systems. I'd kept a habit of maintaining clean copies of all purchase histories and vendor transactions on an external drive I stored off-site, with timestamps, access logs, and metadata intact. And that drive was still in the drawer beneath my old drafting table. I retrieved it, plugged it in, and verified the files. Every forged invoice, every inflated transaction, every fake delivery was right there, with proof that I hadn't been the one to approve any of it. Still, I needed more, something irrefutable. So I reached out to someone I hadn't spoken to in a long time. Ben Langley, the former head of logistics who retired last year. He'd trained me when I was still learning to tell a grain bill from a freight manifest. He was a stickler for details, the kind of guy who saved every memo, every receipt, every sign-off. "Charlotte," he said when I called. "You all right?" "Not exactly," I replied. "Ben, do you still have the old asset transfer forms from the Springfield warehouse sale?" There was a pause. "Of course I do. What's going on?" "I need a copy, like, now." He didn't ask questions. 30 minutes later, he emailed me a scanned copy of the official deed transfer, dated and signed 6 months ago. With that in hand, I now had legal proof that no shipments could have gone to that location, because we hadn't owned it since April. I sat back, breathing hard. My hands were shaking, but not from fear anymore, from adrenaline. And then came the final blow. That evening, Aaron handed me a letter he pulled from the mailbox. No return address, just my name, typed. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Printed email chain between Logan and someone labeled ZH, with my name mentioned repeatedly. The message read, "Once she's out, we can move forward with the third contract. Use her name for approval. She won't know. She'll be gardening by then." ZH, Zach Hayes. My brother. He knew. He was behind all of it. The fake deliveries, the forged approvals, the erasure of my records. This wasn't some consultant scam that slipped past him. It was his operation. And he thought I'd be too broken to fight back. He has no idea what's coming. Comment 2 if you're ready to see what I do next. I didn't sleep again. Not a minute. By sunrise, I was sitting at the kitchen table, binder open, flash drive plugged in, and a folder full of printed invoices fanned out like a deck of loaded cards. My brother Zach thought I'd be out planting tomatoes. He didn't expect I'd be printing receipts with his initials on them. That morning, I made exactly one phone call. To Meredith Price, Hayes Harvest lead investor and my late father's oldest friend. Meredith wasn't just a name on a check. She held a 12% stake in the company and a long memory. She'd been silent in recent board meetings, probably pushed aside by Zach and Logan's new vision. But I knew one thing for sure. Meredith hated being lied to. I called her cell. She answered on the second ring. "Charlotte?" Her voice sounded surprised and slightly wary. I need 15 minutes, I said. I have something you're going to want to see. We met at a diner 2 hours later. I slid the flash drive and the printed files across the table. These are just highlights, I told her. The full data set is in the drive. Vendor fraud, forged approvals, fake deliveries, inflated costs, and evidence my name and signature were used without consent. She didn't speak for several minutes, just read. When she finally looked up, her expression was tight. Do you know how much? Conservatively, $1.6 million in the past 14 months. But that's just from Midwest grow-ops. There are signs of 2 more shell vendors. She folded the paper slowly and slipped it into her purse. Zach has a board presentation tomorrow morning. You'll be there. That wasn't a question. It was an order. The next 24 hours moved fast. I spent the afternoon compiling a full digital report, complete with invoice metadata, vendor registration forms, and side-by-side comparisons of forged versus real signatures. I even pulled security badge logs that showed I wasn't in the building during the approvals I was supposed to have signed. That night, I uploaded everything to a secure folder, then sent 3 encrypted backups, 1 to Meredith, 1 to my attorney, and 1 to a private investigator friend in St. Louis, just in case. Friday, 8 a.m., I walked into the Hayes Harvest boardroom for the first time since they fired me. Every eye turned. Zach looked stunned. Logan went pale. Meredith sat at the head of the table, calm and collected. What is she doing here? Zach asked, forcing a smile. She's here at my invitation, Meredith replied coolly. She's prepared a presentation. You'll want to pay attention. I connected my laptop to the projector. My heart was hammering, but my voice was steady. For the next 20 minutes, I walked them through the scam, piece by piece. Forged contracts, payments to shell companies, deliveries to properties we didn't own. And every single time, Zach and Logan's names floated up like oil on water. When I revealed the email with Zach's initials, ZH, directing Logan to use my name, the room fell silent. Meredith stood. I move that both Mr. Zach Hayes and Mr. Logan Dwyer be suspended immediately, pending full investigation. She turned to the others. All in favor? Hands went up one by one, even the ones Zach thought he controlled. It was over. Almost. As I gathered my things to leave, Meredith tapped her glass for attention. One last thing, she said, smiling faintly. Charlotte didn't come here to get her old job back, but we've created a new role, Chief Compliance Officer. It comes with board voting power and direct oversight of vendor contracts. She looked at me. We'd like you to accept it. I froze. I hadn't expected that. I thought they'd clean house and send me on my way. But this was authority. This was control. This was insurance. I nodded once. I accept. And just when I thought it was all done, just when I thought nothing could surprise me, Logan snapped. You think this ends here? He spat. You think she's clean? Ask her who really signed off on those vendor contracts 2 years ago. My blood turned cold, because 2 years ago, I had approved a small vendor reallocation. Nothing illegal, but sloppy. I hadn't looked closely. Logan had slipped a name into that list, and I hadn't caught it. He was going to pin the foundation of the scam on me. And suddenly, the boardroom turned quiet again. For a second, no one moved. Logan's words just hung in the air like smoke after a firecracker. The kind of silence that makes your pulse thunder in your ears. Ask her who really signed off. That's what he said. He looked at me with this smug, twisted grin, thinking he'd finally found his way out. If he could muddy the water just enough, maybe the board would back off. Maybe he could pin the origin of the fraud on me, the same woman who had just exposed him in front of everyone. I turned toward the board. My voice was calm, but I could feel the heat rising in my chest. Yes, I signed a batch of vendor approvals 2 years ago, and if you check the records, you'll see the name Gresham Supply on that list. That was one of the smaller vendors we were rotating in at the time. I didn't flag anything suspicious because back then, it wasn't. Logan opened his mouth, but I raised a hand. But what Logan didn't mention, I continued, is that Gresham Supply was a real vendor at the time. It didn't become a shell company until after I left operations, 6 months after I stepped away from the procurement desk. I reached into my folder and pulled out a timeline. I anticipated this, so I traced the ownership change. Gresham was purchased quietly by a holding group called RDJ Capital, and guess who signed the acquisition documents? I turned the page. Logan Dwyer, CFO of RDJ Capital. The board members leaned forward. I wasn't done. And here's the kicker. Logan used my old digital credentials to backdate purchase approvals. I have metadata logs from our internal server, showing access to my user ID 3 months after it was deactivated. Same IP, same timestamp. And you'll never guess whose laptop was connected to that IP at the time. I locked eyes with him. Yours! Logan stood up, fists clenched. This is a setup. She's trying to save herself. No, Meredith said firmly. You set this in motion. She just pulled the curtain back. The board voted unanimously to fire Logan on the spot. But that wasn't the end. 3 days later, investigators froze both Logan's and Zach's accounts. The IRS had been quietly looped in after I forwarded the financial trail. Forensic accountants tracked over $2.8 million laundered through fake vendors, with falsified approvals spanning 3 fiscal quarters. Zach tried to play the I was manipulated card, claimed Logan acted alone. But the email, use her name, she'll be gardening by then, was the nail in his coffin. He was removed from the board permanently. His shares were frozen pending legal action. And when he tried to call me, twice, I blocked his number without a second thought. Logan, on the other hand, lawyered up, but the evidence was airtight. Last I heard, he was facing federal charges for wire fraud and corporate forgery. And me? I stepped into my new role as Chief Compliance Officer. Same building, different office. This one with windows. I rebuilt the internal controls from the ground up. Every contract now required dual authentication. Every payment request triggered an audit trail I personally reviewed. No one touched the books without my eyes on it. I didn't do it for revenge anymore. I did it for my grandfather, for the business he built with sweat and honor, for the employees who still showed up every day, trying to feed their families, and for myself, because for once, I wasn't just the quiet daughter in the background. I was the one who'd saved it all. 6 months after the board vote, I was invited to speak at a state agricultural summit. Topic: Ethics in Family-Owned Enterprises. I opened with one line. Sometimes the biggest threat to a business isn't outside competition. It's the people sitting at your dinner table. After the applause, someone from the audience asked me how I stayed calm through it all. I smiled and said, I didn't stay calm. I stayed focused. Because revenge doesn't always come in fire and fury. Sometimes it comes in facts, files, and a single signature that exposes it all. Drop a 2 if you stayed for the twist, and subscribe if you want more stories where justice hits exactly where it hurts.